the debat, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to speak today to Bill S-7, the Zero Tolerances for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. And Mr. Speaker, it's great to see so many MPs speaking to this bill. One of the reasons I got involved in politics from the very beginning was to work on issues like this, to empower women, to fight for equality and liberty, and more than anything, an end to violence. And, Mr. Speaker, since being elected in 2006, it's been this government, and this government alone, under the Prime Minister's leadership, based on our values of pluralism, tolerance, and respect, that has acted as one of the loudest, most determined governments in the world in pushing for safe communities and environments for women. And we've taken the strongest measures to protect vulnerable women in Canadian history. We raised the age of sexual consent from 14 to 16 years to protect young people, including girls, from sexual exploitation by adult predators. And we strengthened peace bond provisions concerning those who were previously convicted of sexual offences against children. We've also improved, might sound like a small thing, but we've also improved the availability of testimonial aids for vulnerable adult victims and witnesses, including women who have experienced violence and have to go through the justice system. And as someone who volunteered in women's shelters for my life before politics, I can tell you that these measures make a huge difference for victims and women that are at risk of violence. Human trafficking is a heinous crime that adversely affects women and girls, and especially Aboriginal women, girls as young as 12 years old. Our government amended the criminal code to create specific offences that prohibit the trafficking of persons for any exploitative purpose, including forced sexual exploitation or forced labour, receipt of a financial material benefit from the trafficking of persons, and the withholding or destroying of travel or identity documents to facilitate the trafficking of persons. These measures, of course, are all designed to protect vulnerable women from these predators, prosecute these traffickers, and prevent this serious crime and human rights violation. It's also why this government supported the creation of a mandatory minimum penalty of 5 years in prison for the trafficking of a person under the age of 18. And, Mr. Speaker, for all of the Liberal talk about their support for Aboriginal women, it was this government, under our Prime Minister, that after 100 years introduced matrimonial property rights on reserve to provide Aboriginal women with basic rights and remedies on fair division of the family home when there's a breakdown in the relationship. And it was this government that guaranteed people living on reserves the same protections as all Canadians enjoy under the Canadian Human Rights Act. So Aboriginal women also have the same legal protection and support that are afforded all Canadian women. These are some of the important actions that our government has taken to improve the legal equality of Aboriginal women. But our government is also working to improve the lives of other groups of vulnerable and disenfranchised women in our country. And that is why we've introduced Bill S-7, the Zero Tolerance for Barbaric Cultural Practices Act. It sends a very clear message that harmful or violent cultural practices are unacceptable in Canada. These practices, whether they're gender-based violence, female genital mutilation, early forced or polygamous marriage, and of course so-called honor-based violence, are incompatible with Canadian values and will not be tolerated in our country. Bill S-7 builds on our government's record of taking very strong action to ensure the equality, safety, and security of all women and girls in communities across Canada by strengthening our laws to prevent and respond to harmful cultural traditions that deprive individuals, and particularly women, of their human rights. I'm especially proud that this government will not fall victim to political correctness and cultural relativism by ignoring these problems, or ignoring the problem of violence motivated by so-called honor. These heinous acts are an extreme and brutal violation of the values that we hold dear, and it is shameful that there are those that encourage them. It bears repeating that when discussing this issue, that all forms of violence, whatever the motive, are fully prohibited by the criminal code. Bill S-7, though, would amend the criminal code to limit the defense of provocation, to ensure that it's never an excuse, ever. That culture could never be an excuse for murder or violence, that the victim did something lawful that led to another person to feel so enraged or so dishonored that it or insulted, humiliated, or ashamed that they would inflict violence. The defense of provocation can currently be raised by a person with what are, in my view, warped values, who is found to have committed a crime, even as serious as murder, where they claim that they did so in the heat of passion and in response to what is a wrongful act or insult by the victim themselves that caused them to lose their self-control. If successful, even though the person is found to have committed murder, they are instead convicted perhaps of manslaughter, which has no mandatory minimum sentence unless a firearm is used. By contrast, a conviction for murder carries a mandatory minimum sentence of life imprisonment and a minimum of 10 years incarceration before being eligible for parole. The defense of provocation has been raised in several so-called honor-killing cases in Canada. It's been raised on the basis that the victim's behavior, such as choosing one's own marriage partner or even one's own dating partner, or making other personal decisions like what kind of clothing to wear without the support or permission of usually the father, sometimes the mother, and extended family, amounted to what is a wrongful act or insult. And this so-called wrongful act or insult would, when considered in the context of the cultural community to which they belonged, apparently provoke the accused to inflict violence and maybe even kill due to a sense of damaged honor or reputation. The defense has been invoked in spousal homicides of women in response to legal conduct of the victim, including where the victim was simply trying to end the relationship or had said something that the killer found insulting, as well as in cases of real or perceived infidelity. I think all Canadians know about some of these very high-profile cases, but what they don't know about is the insidious nature of this kind of oppression that they may not hear about in the paper or the Ottawa Citizen. I think it would make Canadians sick that a murder, and we've seen this, attempt at least, would be excused because the killer was insulted, embarrassed, ashamed, or humiliated, or suffered some other emotional upset based on the concept of honor. It's unacceptable, of course, to excuse murder because a person was unable to control the actions or decisions of another person. In Canada, I think all of us agree that men and women are equal under the law, and the ability to make one's own choices in life is a cornerstone of our democracy. No one deserves to be oppressed or to experience violence because their choices, their legal choices, are unwelcome by their spouse or their parent or their brothers or anyone else for that matter in their community. Accordingly, Bill S-7 proposes to restrict the application of the defense of provocation so that it will no longer be available to those who intentionally kill another person in response to conduct that was legal. The harmful practices that this bill seeks to end, whether it's gender-based violence, early forced and polygamous marriage, and so-called honor-based violence, typically affect women and girls. And they're heinous abuse of human rights, and they have no place in Canadian society. Our government has been clear on this issue from the beginning. Canada's openness and generosity do not extend to such barbaric cultural practices, and we are sending a very strong message to those in Canada and those who wish to come to Canada that we will not tolerate such cultural traditions that deprive individuals, and specifically women and girls, of their human rights. The preservation and promotion of human rights are deep respect for fundamental freedoms and a wholehearted commitment to the universal dignity of all persons stand at the heart of who we are as Canadians. So, Mr. Speaker, I hope that all members of this House will join me in supporting Bill S-7, which signals to Canadian society and, most importantly, signals to women and girls all across Canada and a signal to the rest of the world that Canada remains a leader in ensuring that equality, safety, and security of all women and girls in communities across Canada is paramount. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.